I will always choose you.
In the tumultuous aftermath of the French Revolution, a new era dawned, marked by ambition and profound change. Amidst this chaos, a young general, Napoleon Bonaparte, began his meteoric rise, his strategic genius undeniable. Across the vibrant salons of Parisian society moved Josephine de Beauharnais, a captivating widow of exquisite charm. Her past was complex, her presence enchanting, drawing admiration from all who met her. Their paths, destined to intertwine, would forge one of history's most passionate and ultimately tragic love stories. Napoleon, captivated by Josephine's allure, pursued her with an intensity that mirrored his military campaigns. Josephine, initially hesitant due to her past and his youth, soon found herself drawn into his powerful orbit. Their courtship was a whirlwind of fervent letters and clandestine meetings, a romance burning bright against the backdrop of war. He saw in her not just a lover, but a confidant, a symbol of the stability he craved amidst his ambitions. In March 1796, they married in a modest civil ceremony, a union driven by both burgeoning love and strategic foresight. Their early days were marked by Napoleon's frequent absences, his letters to her filled with longing and devotion. He wrote of his battles, his triumphs, and his unwavering desire for her presence, even from afar. Josephine, in turn, became his anchor, a source of comfort and inspiration amidst the rigors of war. As Napoleon's military campaigns expanded, so did his power, sweeping across Europe with unprecedented speed. Josephine was often by his side, a constant presence, or supporting him from their beloved Malmaison. His victories paved the way for an empire, and with it, a new destiny for Josephine. In 1804, Napoleon crowned himself emperor, and Josephine, his beloved, became Empress of the French. Her elegance and charm transformed the imperial court, setting trends in fashion and social etiquette. She was the perfect consort, embodying the grace and sophistication of the new French Empire. Yet, beneath the glittering surface of empire, cracks began to appear in their passionate union. Napoleon's infidelities, though common for the era, caused Josephine deep pain and insecurity. But the most profound challenge was Josephine's inability to bear Napoleon an heir, a son to secure his dynasty. The pressure on the emperor to produce a legitimate successor for his vast empire became immense and undeniable. This dynastic imperative overshadowed their personal affection, pushing them towards an agonizing decision. In 1809, after much deliberation and heartbreak, Napoleon and Josephine made the painful choice to divorce. It was a decision of state, not of heart, a sacrifice for the future of the empire. Despite the separation, a profound mutual affection and respect endured between them. Napoleon ensured Josephine retained her title as Empress and provided her with a generous income and the Chateau de Mal. She continued to live a life of grace and influence, cultivating her famous rose gardens. Their story, a blend of passion, power, and sacrifice, continues to captivate hearts and minds. It stands as a testament to a love forged in fire, broken by fate, yet forever etched in the annals of history.
Okay, let's dive into one of history's most legendary romances, Napoleon Bonaparte and Josephine. But I gotta warn you, this isn't your typical love story. Oh no, this is a gripping tale of obsession, ambition, and a pretty dramatic struggle for power. Not on a battlefield, but in the heart. And this, right here, this really captures the central puzzle of their whole story. On one side, you've got Napoleon Bonaparte, the military genius who brought almost all of Europe to its knees. And on the other, you have Josephine, the one person who held a kind of power over him that no army ever could. If you get this, you get their entire relationship. So, how did this whole epic story even begin? Well, we have to go back in time. Picture this, it's Paris, 1795. The French Revolution has basically thrown society into chaos. And in this wild new world, two people who could not be more different are about to meet. And that meeting sets off a romance that would become the stuff of legend. I mean, just look at the differences here. He was only 26, a socially awkward but incredibly ambitious general on the rise. She, on the other hand, was 32, a super charismatic and well-connected widow with 2 kids, and let's just say a bit of a reputation. And it's this contrast that is so fascinating, right? From the second they met, Napoleon was just completely captivated. He instantly became the pursuer, totally obsessed with this older, more worldly woman. And when I say obsessed, I'm not kidding. Napoleon's feelings weren't just a crush, they were completely all-consuming. And the best evidence we have of this is in the incredible letters he wrote to her. Seriously, they've gone down in history for their raw, desperate passion. Just listen to his words here. I wake, filled with thoughts of you. My senses are in turmoil. I mean, wow. This is not the cold, calculating general we all learn about in the history books, is it? This is a man totally overwhelmed by his feelings. He wrote to her constantly, his mind filled with her image, even while he was planning military campaigns. These letters show a vulnerability he showed to absolutely no one else. So, what was her response to this absolute flood of passion? Well, as you can see, pretty much nothing. While he was pouring his soul out on paper, Josephine stayed cool, almost detached. She often didn't even bother to write back. This really captures the huge imbalance in their relationship right from the very beginning. He was desperate for her affection. She was, well, kind of indifferent. Now, despite this really unequal dynamic, they actually got married on March 9th, 1796. You might think, okay, this will balance things out, right? Nope. In fact, it just set the stage for a betrayal that would fundamentally change Napoleon and the entire course of their relationship forever. Let's just walk through this timeline for a second. They get married on March 9th. Just 2 days later, he's off to command the army in Italy. And look what happens next. Almost immediately, Josephine takes a lover. But the real bombshell is when Napoleon finds out, which isn't for another 2 years, while he's basically isolated on his campaign in Egypt. Can you imagine? This is the moment. This is when everything changes. For 2 whole years, he'd been writing those passionate letters, being completely devoted, only to find out about her affair while he's stranded miles away in Egypt. The historical sources are pretty clear. When he found out, something inside of him just broke. That romantic, obsessed young general was gone, and in his place was a harder, more cynical man. And this moment of heartbreak, it kicks off the final and most ironic chapter of their story. The entire dynamic of their relationship was about to do a complete 180. The power was about to shift, and shift dramatically. And this slide just lays out that reversal perfectly. As Napoleon grew more distant and hardened, even starting his own affairs, Josephine, incredibly, felt deeply in love with him. So why the change? Well, maybe as his power grew, she realized what she stood to lose. Or maybe she just wanted the man she could no longer easily have. Who knows? But the roles completely flipped. The pursuer had now become the pursued. So let's just pull together the key takeaways from their story. It all started with that huge power imbalance, right? Which we can see in Napoleon's obsessive letters. Then, the definitive breaking point was him discovering her affair in Egypt, which just shattered his romantic view of her. And that discovery led to the ultimate irony, a total reversal, with the now devoted Josephine chasing the affection of a distant, hardened Napoleon. Which really leaves us with this final, big question. Was this one of history's great romances just full of passion and drama, or was it actually something else? A tragic power struggle between 2 people who could never quite manage to be in love at the same time. Their story is legendary for sure, but the true answer, well, that remains as complex as they were. Ultimately, tragic love stories. The romance between Napoleon Bonaparte and Josephine de Beauharnais. This wasn't just any relationship. This was a love affair that didn't just define an era, it literally built an empire. And that brings us to the central question of their entire story. What do you do when the greatest love of your life stands in the way of your greatest ambition? It's a question of personal happiness versus the future of a dynasty. Let's dig into how they faced that impossible choice. So before we can understand the conflict that would eventually tear them apart, we first have to appreciate the incredible bond they actually shared. I mean, they weren't just an emperor and an empress, they were one of history's most formidable power couples, a true dynasty of the heart. What's so fascinating is this idea that they were true equals. In an age totally dominated by male rulers, Josephine was no mere accessory. She matched his ambition with her own powerful mix of elegance, intelligence, and political genius. They were a real team. Okay, so how did this partnership actually work on a day-to-day basis? Well, their individual strengths came together to create an absolute imperial force. This moment at their coronation says everything you need to know about their dynamic. Napoleon wasn't just crowning his wife. He was making a huge statement. By literally taking the crown from the Pope's hands and placing it on her head himself, he was declaring to the world that their power was self-made, a joint venture, blessed not by the church, but by their own sheer will. And her role in all this? It was massive. She was his most trusted advisor, the person he'd leave in charge when he was away. As a diplomat, her famous charm could smooth over situations with foreign leaders that Napoleon's, well, let's just say his bluntness, might have ruined. To the public, she was the sophisticated, beloved face of the empire. She even curated its culture from her incredible estate at Malmaison, which really became the political and artistic center of Europe. And Napoleon himself knew just how vital she was. He famously said, "She brought me luck." And this wasn't just him being romantic. He genuinely believed that her presence, her intuition, was like his good luck charm, a key ingredient to his victories. He felt invincible when she was by his side. But you know how these stories go. Every great epic has a conflict, and theirs had a fatal flaw. For all the power and all the glory they had built together, their empire had one critical vulnerability they just couldn't fix. And their dilemma was stark. On one hand, you have this incredibly powerful partnership and a deep, genuine love. But on the other hand, you have the single most important requirement of any dynasty, an heir. Josephine had children from her first marriage, but for whatever reason, she and Napoleon couldn't have one together. And for an emperor, that's not a personal problem, it's a full-blown political crisis. And this crisis, it pushed them toward what Napoleon would later call the most painful decision of his entire life. This was the moment where duty would tragically, brutally overshadow love. And things moved with stunning speed. I mean, think about it. In 1804, they're literally on top of the world, being crowned together. Just 5 years later, their 13-year marriage is over. The need for an heir was so urgent that Napoleon remarried within a year. You have to understand, this wasn't some cold political calculation. This was an act of profound personal heartbreak. The historical accounts describe this gut-wrenching scene where neither of them could even get through their statements because they were both weeping so hard. This was a true tragedy, a sacrifice they both made for the empire. And this quote from Napoleon himself, it just says it all. He got his heir with his new wife, Marie-Louise. He secured the dynasty. But he lost his happiness. The empire was safe, but its architect was completely heartbroken. It just shows you the immense personal price of his ambition. So, did the divorce really end their connection? Did that piece of paper just sever everything? Not at all. In fact, you could argue their bond seemed to transcend marriage, politics, even death itself. The events that followed just speak volumes. Even after he remarried, Napoleon kept visiting Josephine at her home. When he heard the news of her death, while he was in his first exile on the island of Elba, he was utterly shattered. He apparently locked himself away for 2 whole days, refusing to see anyone. Their connection was clearly anything but broken. Now, let's fast forward to the very end. It's 1821. Napoleon is exiled for the last time on the desolate island of St. Helena, and he's on his deathbed. As his life fades away, his mind seems to get crystal clear, focusing on the 3 things that truly defined his entire existence. Those were reportedly his very last words: France, the army, Josephine. Think about that for a second. Not his second wife, not his son, the heir for whom he sacrificed absolutely everything. In the end, it was his country, his military legacy, and the woman he never stopped loving. Which brings us right back to that final question. Their marriage ended, their empire fell, and they both died worlds apart. But when you consider that his last breath was spent on her name, well, maybe a love that powerful, a love that can forge an entire empire, never really dies at all. So, imagine this. It's 1821. We're on the super remote island of St. Helena. The most powerful man of his generation, an emperor who literally redrew the map of Europe, is on his deathbed. His massive empire, it's all just a memory now. As he's fading, the people around him are leaning him close, trying to catch his final words. You'd think they'd be all about glory, about France, his great battles. And yeah, they hear all that, but then comes the very last whispered word, Josephine. Yep, the name of his first wife, the woman he divorced more than a decade earlier, all for the sake of his empire. And that's the real question here, isn't it? After everything, all the ambition, all the power, the second wife who actually gave him a son, why was she, Josephine, his last breath? To really get it, we have to rewind the clock to the exact moment their world and their marriage just came crashing down. See, their story didn't end because of some bitter fight or a betrayal. It was a flat-out tragedy of duty versus devotion. Okay, so the first thing you have to understand is that this was not a couple that had fallen out of love. Not even close. By all accounts, their connection was incredibly passionate and deep. The problem was something way more powerful than their feelings for each other. It all boiled down to the cold, hard logic of power. Napoleon hadn't just built a career. He'd built this massive empire. And empires, well, they demand a line of succession. After years of trying, it was painfully clear that Josephine, who already had kids from her first marriage, couldn't give him the son he needed to lock down his dynasty. The night he finally told her was just devastating. The second the words were out, she completely collapsed. Napoleon himself had to help carry her out of the room. And here's what's so telling. Napoleon, this stoic general, a guy who stared down cannon fire without blinking, was seen just openly weeping. His own words to her really sum up the impossible situation he was in. He said, "I still love you, but politics has no heart." He didn't stop loving her. He just believed his destiny and the destiny of France demanded a sacrifice. And that sacrifice had to be her. So, what happens next? They go on to live 2 very different lives. But as we're about to see, they were never truly apart. After the divorce, their lives just split onto these 2 completely different tracks. Josephine retired to her gorgeous estate, Montmartre, and Napoleon made sure she kept her title as empress and got a huge allowance. But more importantly, he still visited her. They wrote letters. They just never let go. Meanwhile, Napoleon marries Marie-Louise of Austria, and boom, she quickly gives him the son he so desperately wanted. But that relationship, it was all politics, cold, distant. He even famously admitted, "I married a womb, not a woman." So he got his heir, but he'd lost his soulmate. All right, let's fast forward to the final years, because this is where the echoes of their love story become impossible to ignore. This timeline really shows you just how intertwined their fates were. Notice how quickly everything starts to unravel after their divorce. Josephine's death in 1814 almost feels like a foreshadowing of Napoleon's own final defeat just a year later at Waterloo. It's like this connection just followed them right to the very end. Josephine's death was really sudden. She caught an illness, probably diphtheria, and the timing is just so poignant. Napoleon had just been forced to abdicate for the first time and was shipped off to the island of Elba, and just a few weeks later, she was gone. And this is where it gets almost unbelievable, like something out of a great tragic novel. Look at her reported last words. Bonaparte, Elba, the King of Rome. To her very last breath, she was thinking about him, his place of exile, and his son, the very son that was the reason she was pushed aside. So when the news finally gets to Napoleon on Elba, his reaction is one of just complete devastation. He locks himself in his room for 2 whole days, won't eat, won't see anyone. The emperor was completely broken, mourning the woman he once called the most alluring creature he had ever known. So all of this leaves us with a legacy that is both incredibly grand and, at the same time, deeply, heartbreakingly personal. You can almost distill the entire tragedy into these stark facts. They died at nearly the same age, and they're buried apart, one in this huge imperial tomb, the other in the quiet town she made her home. But the most powerful detail? It's that last one. Their final thoughts were of each other. A perfect, tragic mirror image. So why does this story still get to us? I think it's because it's about a love that never actually died. It was sacrificed. They were torn apart by forces that were just bigger than them. Empire, duty, history. And that leaves us with this incredible paradox, right? The man who could command armies and reshape an entire continent was completely powerless to keep the one person he loved most. And that brings us to the final massive question their story really forces us to ask. For all the glory, for all the power, for a name that echoes through history, what's the real human cost? You have to wonder if, on his deathbed, Napoleon Bonaparte finally knew the answer.